Conference, by the way, on the coronavirus response, particularly focusing on health. If we get time before news at 11 o'clock, I'll play you a little bit of that. First up, though, I want to meet our next guest. Sarah Purvey is a clinical psychologist and author, and she's written a book called Keep Sane and Parent On. It's a bit of a guide to parenting, and I get the feeling that it looks at some of the issues that parents often come to her with, and where they share their challenges in parenting, how they're feeling, and perhaps she offers advice. So let's see what sort of advice she might have for you this morning. Sarah, good morning to you.
Hi, Leon. How are you?
I'm well. Lovely to see you this morning.
You too.
You've got a 3 and a 6-year-old. Why did you decide to write this book, Sarah?
It was stemming from some of my own personal challenges and being a psychologist and then going into being a parent of young children and realising that a lot of stuff was coming up for me that I didn't expect. And then also then seeing a lot of clients in my psychology practice on the Eastern Shore with mums who were struggling with the same thing. And I started to just notice these patterns with clients that were really similarly struggling with the same things, but everyone thought that they were in isolation, that was their own individual experience. And I just feel it's so important to get the message out there that actually lots of parents are struggling with the same similar themes, including myself.
I don't know if this is a high-level sort of psychological theory, but a trouble shared is a trouble halved.
Yeah.
Is there something to that in terms of when clients maybe open up to you about their challenges? If you say, oh, would you be surprised to know that lots of people feel like this? Is that actually a part of the importance of it?
I think that's at the core of psychology. Like the core of psychology is about just knowing that there's actually some support available for you and you're not in isolation. And that's what so many mums feel like, particularly, and I'm specifying mums because predominantly statistically mums are the ones that generally do stay at home with their kids. There's about 3% of dads that are stay-at-home dads, but statistically we're probably talking about mums, and mums generally feel really isolated in Western cultures.
Is there a disconnect between the mythology of parenting, the early years of parenting, and the reality of it? I mean, is that part of what's going on?
I think it is part of what's going on, yes. Like before people are parents, they don't really have much insight into how that actually is for parents in reality. We get a lot of imagery that we see, I guess, like in media that portrays parenting as being a very joyful experience, and it's all about that connection and bond with your child. And it is about that, but it also goes hand in hand with many other challenges that consume a lot of parents.
Quote, there's a perception that having children is a joyful time. That's true, but many parents see a rise of conflict with their significant other. They can become isolated and are often overwhelmed by conflicting advice from family, friends, caregivers, and social media. When you talk to people, I mean, do you talk to anyone who regrets having children?
Occasionally, yeah, occasionally that happens. People do actually divulge that sort of thing to me, and they feel terrible, like absolutely terrible for even having that as a thought. But that's sometimes where their mind will go, like in those moments of just complete overwhelm and feeling very isolated. And the relentlessness of parenting is that, it doesn't finish, obviously. And you wouldn't want it to finish. That's the thing. It's this constant paradox of parenting is that it's so beautiful and so joyful, but it's also connected with so many moments that are so challenging and hard as well.
What are the challenges that you want to help people deal with this book? Can you give us a list of the top issues that you raise and help people address?
Yeah, I think really one of the big issues is parents thinking that they need to be perfect, that they should be doing a certain thing from the moment that they conceive, really. Like there's just so information about how we should be perfectly looking after our bodies and having the perfect caregiver or the perfect birth experience. And I definitely talk about that as well, like as a birth educator too. But we just constantly bombarded with all the things that we should be doing. And then once we're a parent as well, like we get messages about what the baby should be doing in terms of sleep and feeding and breastfeeding and formula feeding and feeding solids, and that just doesn't end. Like there's just always this information of what we should be doing, and what we should be doing is just doing what we think we should be doing, if that makes sense.
One of the things that you address in the book is the importance of perhaps getting to grips with birth stories and the stories around birthing. Men tend to think, to generalise, oh look, the birth bit's over, don't beat yourself up about that 5 years on. And yet when you hear women talk about their birth stories, you can tell that for some reason, a lot of women are still carrying this into, well after the child is born and running around and is happy and well. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, I guess the fact is the statistics indicate that 1 in 3 women identify their births as being a traumatic event. And when something is actually recorded in our brains as being a traumatic experience, like we don't forget trauma. It's not just something that we think, oh, that's happened and, it's over. Actually, sometimes when the brain is so overwhelmed at the time, memories can get trapped or frozen in the brain. So that means that whenever there's any reminder of them, the brain can just kind of access that memory and it feels like it's happening again. Even though rationally it's not happening, but there's a part of your brain, the emotional kind of aspect or the right hemisphere of our brain actually records that it's still currently happening.
What advice do you have for women, Sarah, who are still carrying that sort of negative or traumatic memory of their birth story?
I guess it depends on how much they're actually affected by it on a day-to-day basis. I guess particularly like in the early months or even the first couple of years, I definitely see that there's a need for women to seek some professional support around that. That earlier is probably better than later. Don't leave it as just a memory that you try to forget about and years later you're still actually carrying something from it. So you can definitely seek professional support in the early years and even later. If it's affecting you regularly, if you find that you're being triggered by other people's birth stories or being triggered by seeing newborns and things like that, that's the sort of thing that the mums who are struggling with traumatic births tend to try to avoid, spending time with babies or stories about babies or stories about breastfeeding. So if it's affecting their lives like that, or if they want to have another baby but they're too scarred by birth, that's certainly something to seek some support about, because you can find help.
One of the things that always worried about, I should mention that my guest this morning, Sarah Purvey, she's written a book, Keep Sane and Parent On. She's a clinical psychologist in Tasmania and has decided to write this book. If you're feeling overwhelmed by parenting, if you're surprised by some of the ways you've reacted to your own children, if maybe sometimes you struggle to experience the joy in parenthood, one of the traps you can get caught in is just wanting the day to be over rather than being in the moment of parenting. I know it's something that certainly I sort of chide myself on from time to time. How do you advise people to manage that?
I guess it's about really trying to take that perspective of trying to find joy in each moment. We certainly hear a lot about mindfulness these days and being present, but that's hard to do 100% of the time. Definitely people can beat themselves up about, I'm not being present enough or I'm not enjoying this enough, and that just becomes another should in our brain. But just trying to take breaks where you can. I guess if you feel like you're getting to that point, if you're getting overwhelmed, even if you can, just take yourself outside for a minute and get some fresh air, or take the time if you can, which is incredibly hard, to just make yourself a quick drink. And even if you just sit down for 30 seconds and try and prioritize you over things like housework or things like that, and then coming back in and reconnecting with your kids and doing the things that you like doing with your children.
Good morning to all the parents who can't even go and do number twos on the toilet without having somebody banging on the door
I
and
know.
knocking on it and demanding to come in with some new and urgent matter that has to be addressed to.
We know what that's like, right?
On Mornings Around Tasmania, Sarah Purvey is our guest this morning, clinical psychologist and author. The importance of, the key, and this isn't unfortunately a gift that everybody gets, but being nice to your partner as much as possible so that you can tag team in and out, not carrying too many issues there. Can you talk about how often you see that as one of the issues that affects people's parenting?
I'd say constantly. Just about every single person that walks through my door ends up identifying that as being an issue, that they feel like the load between them is not shared, or that even if the load is shared, there's just a disconnection that happens between partners where there's just less time to be able to spend together, and over time they just spend less and less time together or have less and less meaningful conversations. So even if it's not an intentional thing, relationships can just start to get some distance in them, which causes fractures and then more arguing and conflict with the kids and that sort of thing. So you're absolutely right. Prioritise relationships, definitely, for your team.
Let's give us this. As a clinical psychologist now, if someone comes in and talks about that, what specific advice are you offering?
I'd say intentionally trying to make a point of regularly connecting with each other every day. So even if it's just 10 minutes, like just a 10-minute conversation before the TV goes on, like once the kids are in bed, just making sure that there's no technology. So I'm saying this, like this is what I need to do as well, because we can get so addicted to technology as well. But just making the time together, having the conversations together outside of the moment, like not when you're arguing. That's not a good time.
And make sure it's not some boring. Like this is 10 minutes where I tell you about all the things I need you to do tomorrow.
That's right. Well. Don't make it a lecture. Just something enjoyable, I guess, and definitely trying to set aside the time to properly connect as well. So regular time out together, just even a coffee, like just something, just quick moments, even if it wasn't how it used to be prior to having children, but making a commitment to spend time together.
In this book, Keep Sane and Parent On, you've sort of looking at, you start from people's birthing experiences and even through the process of, from conception. At what age do you sort of think that things get significantly easier and the dynamic changes in parenting?
Look, I think I couldn't really say like at what moment it gets significantly easier, because I'm yet to find any parent that says that it does get significantly easier. I think people tend to find that they get better at managing it. They get better at accepting that this is their journey, and they find ways to be able to spend more time on their own. Perhaps there's a point like once the children get a bit more independent, like when parents feel like they've got a bit more independence back. So when they're more able to do some things that they enjoy doing and, enjoying their careers or things like that, they can feel like it's a bit more accepting of their journeys. But ultimately, little people, little problems, big people, big problems. Often once they get bigger, the problems just they become more stressful in some ways because there's less control that you have over the way that they behave. So a toddler.
Ultimately, you narrow it down to parents trusting their instincts.
I do.
So most of the people you meet, you sort of say, well, what's your instinct tell you? And you tend to find the best answers, or they tend to find the best resource there. Is that what you've learned?
I have learned that, yes. I think a lot of people are very mistrustful of their instinct, and it's very clouded by all the information that's out there, because we just have this social media at our fingertips, and judgment often, or advice from in-laws or parents or any other family member or friends, everywhere, strangers, everyone's providing advice. But I guess that's one of the things that I help people to do, is tune into, okay, well, what do you think? What if you weren't listening to anyone else, what do you think? And getting them to understand, like, what's their child like, what's their child's personality like, and being led by that. And
good luck with the book. It's being launched at Fullers in Hobart tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. The author is Sarah Purvey. She's been our guest this morning, clinical psychologist and author of Keep Sane and Parent On. Sarah, thanks for coming in this morning.
Thanks so much, Leon.
We'll let you get back to the practice. It's a minute to news at 11. On the other side of news.